It's
Yep.
not about demonizing a whole community. It's about holding people responsible for what they did. And if you're not willing to do that, it's only going to grow. It's only going to get worse. Because the truth of the matter is, when we go with this narrative that it's because it's because, first of all, we don't even know that all these kids were disadvantaged.
Right.
We don't even know that all these kids were impoverished. So for that to be the assumption from
Mhm.
anyone is interesting. We don't know that these kids were desperate. We don't know if there's other opportunities to do other things that they would want to do those things. There are some times that you have chances to do something constructive and you'd rather do something destructive.
Yeah.
That's just the way. So we can't assume that's the case. And then I'll tell you this and I'll pass it back to you. I would almost be less worried if this seemed to me to be out of desperation. If this seemed to me to be the cry of the marginalized. But when I was watching the video, it didn't look like that.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
With you no good, Ann Camp, you're listening to the Ann Campaign's Church Politics Podcast with Justin Giboney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson. That's me. And the Windy City representative, the baddest brother above the Mason-Dixon line, my play cousin, the Right Reverend Christopher Butler. Did we have quite a weekend,
Yes.
Chris? As many of you know, we had our Heirs of Action event. I saw some of you there. I appreciate the ones that came out. We had a solid crowd out there. Many elders. It's not too often that you get that many bishops and elders from different denominations in the same room. We were able to do that. We had excellent talks from folks like, Lecrae, John Richards, Lisa Fields, Trenae McGee. We are even blessed by Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, Bishop Claude Alexander, Bishop Timothy Clark, and others. Cam Breeding, who can sing her tail off, did an excellent job. It was just an excellent event. Shout out to those who supported us. And I'm just proud of our team who did a really good job with the execution. Shout out again to Dr. Cynthia Hale and Ray of Hope Church, because they were wonderful and did an excellent job too, man. But just want to hear some of your thoughts as we get into this.
Yeah, no, this was I think everything that I thought it was going to be plus some. It was just a great week, like you said. Turnout, the speakers were great. Justin didn't mention that he gave one of the greatest sermons on the issue of justice and Christian civic engagement that I've ever heard. And as you can imagine, I consume a lot of sermons on the topic of Christian civic engagement. So it was just a tremendous time, and I'm looking forward to seeing the fruit that comes out of it.
Yeah, well, thank you for the kind words. We definitely got some good feedback on that keynote. It's been a blessing. It was a lot going into it, but we have so much work to get done. And as Chris pointed out last time, it ain't about me. It ain't about him. It's really about the church as a whole and you all getting involved as well. Well, I'll remind you, one of the ways to get involved with us is to check out our docu-series, which is on our website, the How I Got Over docu-series about the role that the authority of Scripture played in the Black church. In our education, in the founding, the establishment of the Black church, in our art, and so on. It is worth listening to. If you think that orthodoxy is a white Western construct, somebody lied to you, and you need to see that documentary. Also, be ready and be on the lookout for IVI, the Invisible Institution newsletter. Will be going out very soon. So if you are not on our list, you need to go on our website. You need to register to get on that list. You'll get a lot of political commentary in addition to what you get from the Church Politics Podcast. So make sure that you check that out. A lot to talk about, Chris. A lot going on in your city and in other places. So as always, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, the Fetzer Institute, for supporting us in what we do and how we do it. Also, to all those patrons, if you want to be a patron of the AND campaign and also get some extra premium episodes, you can go to patreon.com/churchpolitics if you want to get a little more information and also, more importantly, be a supporter of what we're doing. So you know what it is. We do this all the time. Grab your Bible, get your mind right, and prepare to think not like a Republican, not like a Democrat, but to think like a Christian. Go ahead and bust your move, Chris.
So this weekend, while I was in Atlanta for the Heirs of Action and the launch of our 2023 Christian Civic Leadership Academy, which is also very exciting.
Yeah.
But while I was in Atlanta, city of Chicago experienced a major surge in chaos. We had great weather in Chicago. In fact, I was jealous because it was warmer in Chicago than it was in Atlanta, where I was. And with that first warm weekend came a something that's become sort of usual and common, unfortunately, in our city. We had a surge of chaos. Hundreds of teenagers flooded our downtown area on Saturday night. That unruly crowd engaged in completely destructive behavior, smashing car windows, attempting to enter the Millennium Park and other sort of places where they weren't supposed to be. Ultimately, there was a big police response, and the situation escalated. Shots were fired. Two teenagers, 14 and 16 years old, were shot. Another man was injured when his car was attacked and his windshield was smashed in by young people jumping on top of his car. We had police having to escort tourists to their cars and parking lots in the city. And this wasn't the first instance of disorderly conduct. Actually, Friday night, there was another large group of teenagers at 31st Street Beach. They took over some buses, and the police had to be called. A 14-year-old was shot there. So Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson here in the city of Chicago said nothing after Friday's events, which was the first really warm weekend night of the year. But following that second consecutive night of unrest, he released just in this statement. He says, in no way do I condone the destructive activity we saw in the Loop and Lakefront this weekend. It is unacceptable and has no place in our city. However, it is not constructive to demonize youth who have otherwise been starved of opportunities in their own communities. Our city must work together to create spaces for youth to gather safely and responsibly under adult guidance and supervision to ensure that every part of our city remains welcome for both residents and visitors. This is one aspect of my comprehensive approach to improve public safety and make Chicago livable for everyone. And I read just in the whole statement because I want people to be able to come to their own conclusion. I think that the statement begins with what feels like a rather perfunctory, almost obligatory sort of preamble before getting into what was really the aim of the communication, which was, I think, to admonish anyone who is calling for these particular youth and perhaps even their parents to face some accountability. And I'll haste to say that the reaction to this statement in this city has been about as divided as the 52-48 election that saw Johnson elected to become the next mayor. And so, I say that to say that there's certainly a constituency for this approach in our city. My fear, Justin, is that the approach is more deeply rooted in narrative than it is in reality. So I'm a huge believer in this idea that we have to focus on root causes of violence, and that we cannot completely police our way out of our youth violence problem. But here's where I think I begin to diverge from my friend and the next mayor of Chicago, and a lot of people. Again, like, this is not like a Brandon Johnson thing. There is a constituency for this approach. But I grew up in the city. I grew up actually in the same neighborhood as Brandon Johnson. And I do not recall this kind of activity being a regular occurrence when we were coming up. And it would seem to me that this constituency would have us believe that the problem is that there is more oppression, more poverty, and fewer programs in neighborhoods like Austin, where I grew up, than that there's less of that today than there was in like 1997. And I'd be hard pressed to believe that that's true. So I did this for us, Justin. I made a list of programs on the west side and the south side that I know of in Chicago. I did this off the top of my head, just programs that I personally know about. So Chicago Youth Services Corps, they employ, I think, 5,000 young people, 16 to 24, in year-round jobs every year. Chicago Youth Programs, they mobilize hundreds of volunteers in Southside and Westside. Dovetail Project, Westside Cultural Foundation, Chicago Urban League, Urban Initiatives, Future Ties, Blackstone Bikes, Girls for Science, A Safe Haven, Becoming a Man, I Am a Gentleman Foundation, Build Chicago, Casa Central, Kids Off the Block, Little Black Pearl, Metro Family Services, Make for Challenge, City Life Center, Metro Squash, XS Tennis Education Foundation. And that's just what I could personally think of. And to my knowledge, none of these programs, Justin, has a chronically burgeoning wait list. Um, it can't just be that we don't have enough programs. I think that there's something else going, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I want to turn it over to you. But the other thing I want to say before I do is just that the other part of this narrative is that it's very unfair to hold up this group of kids as a representation of this entire generation, right?
Yeah.
It's not an accurate picture. According to one study from the National Institute of Justice, 1% of young people are responsible for more than half of all youth-related violent crimes. We have right now in Chicago about 300,000 youth living in this city. If 1,000 of them were downtown on Saturday night wreaking havoc, 299,000 were not. And if we do deal swiftly and even a bit harshly with young people who make the affirmative decision to behave this way, I don't think that is the equivalent of somehow throwing away an entire generation, because this is not the entire generation. So we talked a little bit before we even started rolling. I can go on about this. I'm very passionate about it, but I want to toss it over to you, Justin, and get your thoughts.
Well, I'm glad you expressed your heart on it, because I know your heart for young people, especially young people in Chicago. Those that have listened to this podcast for any decent amount of time know that we are for a comprehensive approach when it comes to law enforcement. That we want these kids to thrive, and I think one of the things that happens when you don't address lawlessness like this in the right way, you end up hurting the kids that were there and the kids that weren't there.
Yeah.
So I don't think you're helping anybody by taking these positions. And when you talk about some of the responses, one of those responses being from the mayor-elect, I think it shows why we urge Christians not to be overly ideological. Because I think that response in kind of not wanting the kids or the parents to have responsibility placed on them shows what happens when we're trying to promote or defend ideological conclusions rather than seeking what's good and true.
Yeah.
So what we got was a progressive trope, right? Which is basically, don't ever blame the kids or people who may be in tough positions. It has to be the system's fault. And in this case, I think that gets us nowhere. I don't think it helps the people that you think you're defending when you say that, nor do I think it helps the people who are victims of what happened. We have to be willing to tell the truth. No one is responsible for this other than these kids and their parents.
Yeah.
That's who's responsible. And I agree with what Dr. Charlie Dates said, which is the community as a whole has to take responsibility for this.
Yeah.
Obviously, the police have to get involved once it happens.
Mm-hmm.
But from a deeper preventative standpoint, from a deeper community standpoint, you don't want that to happen. There are many ways that we can prevent this from happening if we're on our jobs, because once the police get involved, it's not going to be pretty, especially when this is a matter of life or death. And so we're kind of treating this like, yeah, it was cute. They did what they did. Well, let's not blame that. No, two people got shot, as I understand it.
Yep.
People were assaulted. Property was destroyed and stolen, which is lesser than the first two that I said, but it still matters when people are breaking into public parks and private buildings and all that stuff. That's not okay. This is in a way, Chicago got lucky that it wasn't worse, that people didn't get, there weren't more shots fired and people killed. You have to step up as a leader and say no.
Yep.
There's time for a whole bunch of nuance about this and that, and there's time to say this is unacceptable. If it happens again, this, and this will happen, and you will be prosecuted to the furthest extent of the law. We will not stand up for this. If an executive, especially a local executive, cannot stand up and unequivocally say this will not be tolerated, you're going to run into trouble. Because the truth about lawlessness is your point that you made. It's only a certain groups that are prone to this, and many times it's certain groups of young people. It's not a certain race or anything. It's certain groups of young people and idle men can in many cases be prone to this type of lawlessness. And if it is not shut down, it does not make them stop. If it's not shut down and very clear boundaries are drawn, then it grows and it continues.
Yeah.
If we truly care about the community, then we call out the people who are tearing up the community in the same breath, provide opportunities for other people and other kids. And even those kids, I mean, people make mistakes. It's not about making sure their whole lives are ruined.
Right.
But it is to say, if you do this again, you run the risk of that being the case. And we're not going to stand here and put up with it. That's just the way that things have to go. Another thing that I said, to say, well, it's not about demonizing anybody, right? It's not about demonizing a whole community. It's about holding people responsible for what they did. And if you're not willing to do that, it's only going to grow. It's only going to get worse. Because the truth of the matter is, when we go with this narrative that it's because it's because, first of all, we don't even know that all these kids were disadvantaged.
Right.
We don't even know that all these kids were impoverished. So for that to be the assumption from anyone is interesting. We don't know that these kids were desperate. We don't know if there's other opportunities to do other things that they would want to do those things. There are some times that you have chances to do something constructive and you'd rather do something destructive.
Yeah.
That's just the way. So we can't assume that's the case. And then I'll tell you this, and I'll pass it back to you. I would almost be less worried if this seemed to me to be out of desperation. If this seemed to me to be the cry of the marginalized. But when I was watching the video, it didn't look like that. In many cases, it looked like it was for sport. I saw kids dancing on cars, laughing about what was happening.
Yeah.
I didn't see the desperation of a group that had just had enough. And I think we make a lot of assumptions about the class and all this other stuff, the situation that these kids are in. Don't put this on impoverished kids if you don't know that to be the case. First of all, not every black kid is impoverished.
Right.
So you don't know if that was the group that did it or not. But what we know was there's a certain element in all communities that if they're not given very clear boundaries and understand the consequences of what they're doing, this is what's going to happen. And we got to learn from that. And it's just a big question, and not even just on the mayor-elect. Can progressives govern in these situations, in these type of cities? I think the mayor that I work for, Kasim Reed, was somewhat progressive. But when it came down to say, hey, this has to stop and I'm not playing with you, it wasn't nothing else to be said about that. But go ahead.
Yeah, and those two things do have to coexist, because I think that I think one of the reasons that Brandon Johnson was elected mayor of this city is because you can't just hold up as an alternative strategy, well, we're going to send a whole lot of police after teenagers, because police ultimately exist as a part of this tremendously meaningful and honorable group of persons we call first responders. But they are always responding. Policing is not a preventative strategy. So you have to take a more nuanced approach and go toward these root causes. But I think we have to do better at identifying those root causes, because as you were saying, one, we don't know that all these kids were disadvantaged or impoverished. And to the extent that any of them were, we don't want to continue to reinforce this argument that I think, Justin, ultimately it goes around the circle and gets back. It starts off trying to be progressive, but it gets back to racism, because you're essentially making the argument that being under resourced and being in poverty equates to being hopeless.
Right.
And that's just not my experience. Like I said, I grew up in this city. I grew up poor. I grew up with drugs in my household, sin, violence, cousins, and gangs. And that's not my experience, and more importantly, is not our inheritance as Black people, right? Like, we have as a legacy this thing in our in our culture where folks were able to take the most abject oppression and poverty and convert it into motivation to be dignified, to achieve greatness, pursue success, build families, build communities, build legacy, right? And so I think that we have to get back toward that. And I'm talking about this not just here on the podcast, but in a lot of places, because it may seem like I'm criticizing Brandon Johnson a lot, and at some level I am, but it is friendly fire. Brandon Johnson is a man that I know, a man that I respect tremendously. I might even be able to say that I admire him, and I'm still hopeful for his administration, because Brandon has a skill that we have not had on the fifth floor in my lifetime, which is the ability to step to a microphone and make people feel something, make people believe something, and engender some hope. But I would just suggest that the program that we try to replicate be the program that actually worked for me, that worked for Brandon, that's working for our children right now. And that program is a solid family, a well-knit community, going to church on Sundays, and the things that government can do to reinforce that. I remember, Justin, growing up, and it would come on television at night. It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? Let's start sending that out on a text message. We have some emergency thing, because I always get it when there's an Amber Alert or a storm coming. So we know how to get a message to everybody's phone. Send it at 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Kids break curfew. Let's not just say, let's not demonize the children, but let's get as many of them on a line out there on that street and issue a summons for every one of those children and their parents to appear, so that we can begin to sort it through. Is this a family that's experiencing, some kind of debilitating poverty, and they need to be connected to resources? Or is this a family that has resources and connection to support and need some other kind of intervention, parenting classes, all types of, like, we have to be serious and get on top of this. We can't just offer this kind of narrative, because it's not going to cause a solution, and our city is going to die under this kind of pressure.
And what we have to realize, and this is for any group, any culture, that if you don't check it early and unequivocally, and that's what we didn't receive. I think that's what we're saying about the response. It wasn't unequivocal in that, no, you are responsible and you better stop.
Yeah.
When you don't do that, it seeps into the culture, right? It becomes more than just this one thing that they did. It seeps into how they view, respect, authority. The way that they were treating the police officers out there is, come on, man. These are your brothers and sisters too that are putting their lives on the line, and basically they were mocking them because they knew what they could do and what they couldn't do. And as I understand it, even within what was going on with the Chicago police, there was a problem with who's in charge and what are we going to do and what can we do. Yeah. So they had to just sit there and take it. and how you treat. I have some very serious problems with around the nation how police have treated and are treating my people.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? When I'm with my sons and we see a police officer, go tell him thank you for the work that you do.
Yeah.
Not because I know that that's even a good officer, but because if it's going to start with me, in as much as it's up to me, we're going to be peaceful. And I'm going to let you know I appreciate the job that you're supposed to be doing and have respect for you. Hopefully that you'll treat my people with the same way and that you are part of my people.
Yeah.
We have to do this. And so I appreciate the way that you handle the mayor-elect. As people know, we want every leader in this country and around to be successful.
Yes.
We want that success. And at the same time, you know that on this podcast, I'll reiterate, we believe in impartiality. We're not going to be partial. So no politician, no party, nobody is above a fair and constructive critique. Y'all call us out when we give a critique that's not fair and constructive. What I heard was just fair and constructive, a brother-to-brother advice to say, hey, before you get started, because this really ain't completely on him. He's not even there. He's the mayor-elect, right?
Right.
But it's the response to say, that may not be the way you want to handle this. I know in other positions and when we're commentating, we can kind of give the progressive narrative and trope. This is a moment to say, hold up now. I love this city. I love y'all too. I want to protect you. I can't protect you when you act like that.
Yep.
You become the problem and not the police officer, whoever else you think is the problem. When you become the problem, I handle you like you're the problem. Don't walk into that space because I'm not going to have other citizens in that situation unequivocally, because guess what? The kids who did that, let's hope that it doesn't happen again. They're not the only people in the city that deserve to be protected.
Yeah.
And so for the other people that I'm here to protect, you bet not ever do that again. And if you do, it's going to be some serious consequences for you and your parents if you're underage.
Yep.
That's what an executive, that's what a leader in a household, in a community, in a city has to do.
Yep.
Are we willing to do that? I'll let you take us out, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just said it perfectly, Justin. And my thing with Brandon Johnson is imagine that message coming from somebody where the young folks, the people in Black communities and brown communities, poor folks, don't have to question whether this guy loves you, whether he's got your best interest in heart. You know he does, but that still doesn't mean I'm going to tolerate that kind of foolishness. That's the way we got to be.
That's right. Well, that is a good conversation, man. I can't wait to hear what y'all are going to tell us about this segment on Patreon and what your thoughts were. And maybe we'll even talk about it on one of our Patreon premium episodes. But good conversation. We will be right back on the Church Politics Podcast. And we are back on the Church Politics Podcast with Justin Gibney and the Right Reverend Christopher Butler. Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp, who you might recall refused to find quote unquote extra votes for President Trump in this state in 2020, and then in turn became the target of Trump's ire, had some words to say, some tough words to say in regard to the 2024 presidential race at the Republican National Committee meeting, which was held in Nashville. I believe it was last week. And he said this, he said that not a single swing voter in a single swing state will vote for our nominee if they choose to talk about the 2020 election being stolen. To voters trying to pay their rent, trying to make their car payment, trying to put their kids through college, 2020 is ancient history. Voters want to know the GOP's vision for the future and couldn't care less about anyone's sour grapes. Whose sour grapes is he talking about? This clearly seems to be about Trump and the narrative that he was running with in the last election cycle that, in my opinion, cost the Republicans quite seriously. Now, if you recall, and this goes along with the larger story, Trump is one of the few, Governor Kemp is one of the few Republican leaders who has been willing to criticize Trump publicly and who actually beat the brakes off of Trump's candidate in the last election. So Trump, because he didn't like Kemp, He ran somebody against Kemp in the primary, the GOP primary here in Georgia, and Kemp beat dude like he stole something. It was actually very embarrassing. I don't know why Purdue ran. I know that hurt Trump, and you know how Trump does. He ends up blaming it on the candidate or whatever, even when he put him up to it. You know, he guy of great integrity. That's usually how he handles it. Now, to be clear, Trump, you know, Kemp punched back and all that, but Kemp wasn't necessarily looking for this fight initially, you know, in 2020. He had gone along with Trump for a long time, so we're not going to revise history. He had gone along with Trump when he was in office for a long time, just like everybody else. But once he was backed into a corner, Trump, I think, threw him under the bus for opening Georgia up, then threw him under the bus for not finding or somehow creating votes so that he could win the election. And we know that at least when it came to Raffensperger, it was recorded, so we know this to be the truth. But when he was pushed into a corner, Kemp did fight back. He fought back against Trump and he won. And he did show integrity by saying, bro, I'm not about to change the results of the election or push anybody to do anything for you at this moment. And I think Kemp is right. If Trump or whoever else goes into this election, 2024, talking about what was stolen, talking about this sour grapes, it's a wrap. And it might be a wrap anyway. But I think the 2022 midterms shows us proof of that. Trump losing Georgia shows us proof of that. When you talk about swing states, when you talk about swing voters, they're not going for that stuff, and he cannot win without them. Okay? It's questionable if he can win with them, with some of them. You know what I mean? Can he get them even if he wasn't talking about that? Maybe is a better way to put it. So you have this situation where, look, a lot of Republicans, a lot of swing voters in Georgia have already rejected Trump, yet he is by far the favorite in the polls for 2024. No other Republican is even close. DeSantis was hanging with him or looked like he could be in striking distance for a little bit, and he hasn't announced yet. But then when those shaky charges against Trump came out in New York, it seemed to give him an even bigger lead. So it's going to be interesting. I will say this. If the Dems are forced to run somebody other than Biden, Trump might have a better chance. And I think even the two people on this podcast, or maybe just myself, because I don't know what your predictions were. I've already, you know, in the first election, 2016, underestimated Trump. So I don't want to go in completely underestimating him, but I think he got taken out, and then you know the next midterms really suffered. So I think Kemp is right here. What are your thoughts on just this whole subject?
Yeah, so I'll say, you know, not to toot my own horn, but from Trump's first press conference by the escalator, I remember I was at a book signing event when he on that evening, and I was like, this dude's gonna beat everybody.
Really? Okay. Hey, he fooled me. I was fooled.
And everybody's like, nah, nope. I was like, nope. This, you know, elections are so much about name recognition and money, and then it's just that sport. And I was like, oh man, this dude is getting ready to clear this Republican field, and if the Democrats nominate Hillary Clinton, forget about it. And I think, you know, I think if Donald Trump goes into 2024 talking about 2020, I think Kemp's absolutely right. I will say though, if we look at Trump's campaign so far, he hasn't really centered 2020.
That's true. That's true.
You know, and if you get a Trump, a reinvigorated, more 2016 style Trump, going into a general election, certainly against somebody other than Joe Biden, but even against Joe Biden, I mean, the last election, you know, it was in the middle of COVID, and so it was it was the playoffs in the bubble. I mean, it was not the real thing. I mean, and when you have a Joe Biden that's got to get on planes every day and crisscross the country and have rallies and talk to folks, I mean, I'm not saying that Trump can easily beat Joe Biden, but we don't know over the next year what kind of things going to happen.
But we know what
The
we do know is
economy,
this. What we do know is this: Biden ain't crossing the country doing a whole bunch of nothing.
yeah,
Your best option is to just do what they did last time. If they had to hide him last time and kind of not have him go out there, that's what they're going to do again. I mean, Trump
yeah,
obviously has more energy. Biden is he's always been prone to making mistakes, but really now it kind of makes him look like he's unfit, like he's doesn't have the capacity. So I expect that they will hide him. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I just
yeah.
had to ask.
I think it's going to be a lot more difficult, though. It's going to be a much different contrast when it's not COVID, because in the last election, we were all doing everything on Zoom. You were rarely seeing
That's true.
people who you don't live with. So it's just going to be a very different cycle. And while I don't have that same feeling like, oh, this guy's going to like run through everybody. But I do feel that while I agree with Kemp for sure, like I think that if you make a 2024 election about the 2020 election being stolen, um, I don't think you can. That's not
Why
going to reach
vote?
people. Yeah,
And then why vote for some other people, right? Like if
right.
they're just gonna steal it, why even? So Trump may have already made that, may have come to that conclusion already himself,
Yeah,
or at
what
least
they should do, like if I were in Trump's camp or in Republican, uh, sort of decision making circles, I would try to remind people that the only reason Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, it was not about the election being stolen. It was about the party not embracing a shift that was taking place in voting habits. Right, so you campaigned against vote by mail instead of organizing your people to actually vote by mail, and you failed to do something. Even with that failure to mobilize, I think if Trump sends out one more round of checks,
yeah,
then
McConnell
he's
killed him.
probably going to get reelected. And so it's material politics, and uh, and campaign sort of like on the ground strategy that cost Trump the 2020 election, which is why I don't know. To me, it was foolish to go after the whole like the election was stolen thing, uh, immediately. Like if I had his ear, he should immediately went to I'll be back, right? Like we lost this narrowly because the ground shifted up under our feet. But
Yeah.
this guy's going to wreck the country, and I'll be back in 4 years. And he never left the limelight, even with being taken off of social media and all that kind of stuff. So Kemp is right. Don't talk about 2020. That I don't think you get swing voters like that. But I don't think that the Democratic Party should rest easy in that assessment, because there's nothing indicating to me right now that's even going to be Trump's um, sort of approach to the campaign. And we have to remember that even in the 2022 midterms, there was the election fraud weight around the shoulders of the Republican candidates, but a lot of the candidates that Trump put forward were also just really bad candidates. And so
Yeah.
never underestimate how bad it can get if you put a really bad candidate forward, which is to me, that's what Democrats got to be thinking about. Is
Well, it
like,
seemed like
how do
they
we?
were very bad candidates, but it seemed like only the bad candidates were willing to do what he wanted them to do,
Exactly.
right? So he
Exactly.
kind of created, he had a very small pool of applicants that were really
Exactly.
willing to do that with any type of credibility, and so I think that is part of it. But we'll see. I mean, you can't underestimate Trump, because he does have a talent that most people don't have, and he finds issues that kind of brings people, a certain group, to him. You also have a Biden that is in tough shape, and a Democratic Party that's bench doesn't seem to be that great. You do have Gavin Newsom is interesting to me, who's been in like Florida trolling DeSantis, and it's like, bruh, you got too much stuff going on in California for me to respect anything you got to say about anybody else's state.
Yeah.
Who is telling you to do this?
Yep.
Now he's announced that if that's just something else that we're about to talk about in a minute, but Feinstein, he's announced that he'll make a black woman the candidate if he has to replace her and all that stuff. But bro, I think you should be focused on what you're supposed to be do at home. And a lot of the legislation that he's even passing is the legislation that he's passing to run for president. But it's like, dude, focus on what's going on in your state, bro. It's, it is what it is, but that's just another element of what's going on in what I think is going to be a very interesting race. It's coming very soon.
Yeah.
And so the AND campaign, hopefully we can continue to educate you in this space. We'll be joining with a lot of the elders that came to the event to put on some, what I think will be helpful events and things of that nature. So stay tuned for that. But it's going to be an interesting season that we got coming up. So we're going to keep you informed. We're going to keep, again, the content coming, man. Y'all just keep your ears open and get your feet ready to be engaged. We will be right back on the Church Politics Podcast. And we are back on the Church Politics Podcast with Justin Gibney and Chris Butler. Speaker Dianne Feinstein is 89 years old. She has been completely absent from the Senate since February because of an illness. And since that time, obviously, she has not taken a single vote, meaning that she's missed, I think, about 60 votes. Even when she was physically there, though, Chris, people are reporting that she wasn't quite there mentally, that she's maybe incapable of doing her job. During her last interview, it seemed that she didn't even know that her team had issued a statement saying that she wouldn't run for another term. And so that was kind of embarrassing. Because she's missed so much time, and because I think of the thought that she's been kind of incapacitated just due to her age, California Congressman Ro Khanna, respectfully, I think he was respectful, called for her to retire. He said that he respected what she had done. She had accomplished a lot, but that it was time for her to retire. Another congressman called the situation a dereliction of duty. Now, Feinstein's office, Chris, said that she wasn't going to resign, but they did urge Senate Majority Leader Schumer to replace her on the Judiciary Committee. Now, it's one thing that she's missing votes just in general, but it's another thing that she's holding up judicial candidates. And we know that the Trump administration was very efficient and effective when it came to judicial appointment of conservative judges. Now, Democrats are saying, hey, during the Biden administration, we need to catch up with progressive judges. And now you have somebody on that committee, a Democrat who's on that committee that's not there, which allows Republicans to stop them from appointing people. Now, the interesting part, Chris, is that Feinstein's people are saying, okay, go ahead and just replace her with another Democrat. But it's not that easy, right? In order to replace her, Schumer would need a unanimous vote, or at least to get to that 60 person threshold to get her replaced. And it doesn't seem to me, maybe you know something that I don't know, Chris, it doesn't seem to me that Republicans have any motivation to help Schumer get Feinstein replaced. Number one, they don't want them to put any more judges on the bench. Number two, why would they see the infighting? Why would they stop the infighting? Now, for me, they should be both sides should be acting with intellectual honesty and in the best interest of the country. And generally, you let the leader put on committees who they should have on the committees. So I'm certainly not saying the Republicans are right, but based on the context of what's been happening lately, that doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And I don't know about you, Chris, but it does seem kind of selfish at this point to stay in a position that you just don't seem to be able to serve. Now, I will say this. She has some people coming to her defense. Nancy Pelosi's office called Khanna and others sexist for their comments. So they're saying they're sexist for saying, hey, respectfully, it's time to retire. Sexism is real. I think we both agree with that. Ageism is real. And I think, even seeing my parents at time or two, like not engage, but receive kind of ageism, it's a serious thing. Mm-hmm. So I don't think this really should ever be about somebody's age. It really should be about whether they can do the job or not. But when we come out and call somebody sexist for making a reasonable um, demand, right? For saying, hey, this is time. That's reasonable based on what we've seen. It's not just based on the age, it's based off what we've seen. When you call them sexist, and I get on people who do this with racism too, you hurt the actual real issue. So I think think Nancy Pelosi's office was wrong for calling somebody sexist when they're making, even if you disagree with them, it's reasonable, right?
Yeah.
Can she do the job or not? It's not necessarily about her age. If she can't do the job, whether she's her age or Fetterman's age, with people are saying, can he do the job? Then maybe she should step down. But here's the overriding thing. The voters knew her age. The voters knew her condition, and they voted her back in. So she does have that argument on her side as well. If they wanted somebody younger or somebody who was operating differently, they could have, handled that. But go ahead, Chris. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think your last comment there sort of gets to what comes mostly to my mind when I look at this whole fiasco, which is we have to figure something better in how we're electing members of Congress. Um, there's, there's very little more predictable uh, in the world than who's going to win congressional and Senate elections. I mean, it's over 90% incumbent reelection rate. And so the argument, at least in my lifetime, it can't be that the argument that folks are making is look at the job we're doing, right? Because
right.
Congress hasn't been performing that well for a long time, but members of Congress get reelected over and over again. And I think throughout our government, elections have become something strange, like where it's like people have this right, to be there, and it's about if they're connected to the right person, because even when it's not an incumbent, it's well, this person's chief of staff, or the one who they worked in the alderman's office for 30 years until that alderman got really old, and now they're just a little bit old, but now they're going to get the seat. Like, so it's something other than what I think you conceive of when you think about a democratic form of government, where voters look at individuals and make a choice based on who's got the best set of ideas. And you can't lay all of that at the feet of the elected officials themselves. I think that it has a lot to do with how money is involved in our politics, but we also have to do some introspection and into how we ever get to this place. And so we talked about in the last block about Brian Kemp, and sort of like saying some truth about Donald Trump. I think the same sort of credit goes to Congressman Ro Khanna for saying some truth about Dianne Feinstein. If you can't do the job, you should give up that job. No, the Republicans are not going to help. And even though I'm totally opposed to the kind of bifurcated, hostile, polar ideological warfare that we have going in government, I respect the idea that Republicans and conservatives don't believe that it is in the best interest of the country to put a lot of liberal judges on the federal bench. And so I wouldn't expect that they would help Democrats be able to do that. Now, you won elections fair and square, you should be able to do it. But if you can't figure out how to get your stuff in order enough to do the thing that you think is going to help the country, I'm not going to help you do it if I don't think that it is in the best interest of the country. And so this is something that Democrats do have to figure out inside of their party. And it makes no sense to me that the sort of right, some sense of privilege to this seat in the United States Senate is being allowed to overshadow the fact that the most populous state in the country only has one senator effectively right now, and the Democratic Party is unable to move forward their judicial nominations.
Yeah, I mean, and going along with what you said earlier is I've literally seen people run from their deathbed
Yeah.
Get elected, pass away, so that there could be a special election, and then it's passed to somebody that was handpicked. If we care about democracy, it shouldn't happen that way. There's two places that I think we can look to say we can do better. As an elected official and somebody, if you cannot do your job, you owe it to the people to step down. So you owe it to the American people. So not just your constituents, you're in your district. You owe it to the people that say, "Man, I'm not able to do what I need to do." And the voters, as you just said, the voters, ultimately it's on you. People don't like to step down. Like, it's hard, and being somebody who's not of that age, I want to be charitable to say it's easy for young people to say, "Man, just step down. Your time's up." I mean, there's some people think when you turn 40, you're supposed to step down and not do anything else. So I do want to be charitable that if you're of sound mind and the people put you in there, you can do the job. Hey, I'm not one of those people who say all boomers have to get out of every single position. Hey, I can't make that decision, because who knows where I'll be at that moment either, myself. It's not an easy decision to make. Just say, "Hey, you've been doing so your whole life. Just go and do nothing now, or do something else." That person does make that decision, but I think we all have to be responsible and say, "Hey, I'm not in the position to continue to do this, or at least I need to make sure successors are coming," or whatever. So, we're all in this together. We all play a part in the conversation. I do think, and I would like to hear what you think about Ro Khanna being called sexist for that. I mean, I'm just saying, like, guys, we don't just because when you disagree with somebody and you can hit them a place that hurts, that don't mean you have to do it. Like, don't just you if you care about that issue, why use it in a way that is not justified, right? Why use it in a way that is just exploiting the issue for immediate, for that kind of immediate impact? I don't know, man. I just don't like that.
Yeah, I think it's disgusting. I think it is intellectually dishonest, and we shouldn't do that. We can't do that. Like, we have to return some of our public conversation to taking place on some foundation of basic intellectual honesty. Like, just be curious. Think about it for 3 more minutes. I'll bet you could come up with another good criticism, so that you can come to the defense of your, person who you're trying to defend, and make some argument for why a person who can't show up to the United States Senate should continue to be a United States Senator. That doesn't make any sense. But I bet you if you thought about it long enough, you would come up with some other dumb argument than actually taking an issue that is not yet settled, that really needs work and advocacy, and cheapening that issue. Like, just don't do that. Take 2 more minutes. There's plenty of dumb arguments to be made.
If you're gonna make a dumb argument, at least make sure it's not completely intellectually dishonest. I think that's the point of this segment, man. Hey, as always, we appreciate y'all. I hope you all appreciate these conversations we have. We are committed to being as honest and impartial as we can be, and that goes for everybody. I hope if I do something at some point, Chris has to say, "Hey, man, I got to be real with you. That ain't what you were supposed to do." And so we're committed, and because we think that's the only way you change the news and the commentary that we're getting. If me and Chris sit here and choose a side that we're going to go hard on, and then just kind of touch the other side, or don't ignore then we're not helping you. We're not being who we said we're supposed to be. I know that our audience appreciates that. As our audience grows, I hope that appreciation grows, because we're going to continue to do it. I don't know that we're here for any other reason. Ain't nothing really all that special about us. So maybe the fact that we're trying to approach it differently, not perfectly, we get things wrong, but maybe the fact that we're trying to approach it with some honesty, with impartiality, adds something to the discourse. Yeah. I think, hopefully that's what we have to contribute, and that's what we're trying to do. So as always, folks, you know how it is. In camp, there's a cross that neither political conservatism nor progressivism is fit to bear. There's a civic hearing in need of faithful witnesses who love social justice and won't surrender the truth to be loved by the world. Politic with the boldness and compassion of Jesus Christ. Until next time, and camp. We'll holla at you.